All right, guys, welcome to this week's Value Added Forum. Tonight we're going to be learning about Ruby on Rails, and our presenters tonight are going to be Sean Fisher and Ryan Craig, and without further ado, I'm just going to turn the time over to them. Thank you.
Great, thanks. All right. This is so exciting. I'm glad that you all came. Ruby on Rails is great. Let me start our presentation here. So, there we go. So my name is Sean Fisher. This is Ryan Craig.
Ryan.
We want to start out by telling you just a little bit about us. So, Ryan,
You want me to go
start?
first?
Yeah.
Okay. My name is Ryan Craig. I first got introduced to Ruby last year when I did a presentation in school about it. Since I've had a lot of fun working with it and just learning and playing around with it. I don't actively work in Ruby, but I do use it for a lot of school projects and things. Right now I work at Anglepoint. It's a great place to work. I did an internship over the summer with Goldman Sachs, and I'm returning there next summer. So really excited about that. Sean?
Great. Thanks, Ryan. And Ryan is great to come and help out tonight. My experience with Rails started back in high school. I did a few websites, some national competitions with Rails, and did fairly well in the competitions on the national level. And that was back in Rails like version 2 and version 3. Now they're on Rails 4. I haven't used version 4 a ton. It just came out fairly recently. We're going to be working in Rails 4 tonight because that's the latest and greatest. And not too much is different. But we are both first-year master's students in the MISM. And we are excited to talk about Rails tonight.
Yeah.
So if you have any questions, or as you're following along, if any problems come up, just raise your hand and Ryan will be able to come around and help as we go through this presentation.
Absolutely.
So also it's kind of hard to see with these like bright lights, but don't be hesitant to raise your hand, and if at first I don't see you, wave it around or something, because it is kind of hard to see. So
Let's do hold up one finger if you just need me to come help you with something on your computer, and just hold up your hand normally if you just have a question for the general class. That'd be really helpful.
great. Okay, any questions to start, or questions about us or anything? No? Yes.
I was just curious where I can go to find this afterwards to watch. It'll be available online.
Oh, good question. So yes, this will be available online. If you go to the AIS website, which is ais.byu.edu, it should be available up there. I don't know how soon after the presentation it'll be available. We're trying some new technology that should make it a little bit quicker than in the past, but we don't know for sure. So good question, though. Thank you. Any others? Okay, great. Well, let's dive in. First, we're going to talk about why Rails. What is this big Ruby on Rails thing? How many of you have used Rails before? Okay, a couple of you. Great. That's awesome. How many of you have heard about Rails before kind of this week? Yeah? Okay, so most people. That's great. That's great. We're going to talk about why it's kind of been making waves in the web development world for a while now, and and why we should learn it. And then we're going to talk about Model View Controller, which is kind of an important point in Rails. And understanding Model View Controller will really help us understand the Rails framework. And then we're going to build something exciting, something fun, and that'll be great. So I hope that as we sent out in the information, all of you should either have come pre-installed with Rails, or if not, then there's a web IDE that's really easy to set up and really simple. It's called nitrous.io. So if any of you don't have Rails installed on your computer, then you can use that. I have a referral link on my website that I put up if you just go to fishershawn.com. Oh man, what if I turn it down? Can you still hear me through it? Okay. That's too bad. Great. Okay, if you go to fishershawn.com, then I think it's the first link on the page under Install Rails. there's a Nitrous.io link. It's a referral link, so if you use it, then both of us get extra nitro, they call it, which is like the points you use to build your box. And you can just go on there and start a Ruby environment, and it is super slick and super nice. So kind of while we go through the rest of this first part of the presentation, feel free to go out and sign up for that if you want an easy way to follow along. I'll just turn it off.
Let's project.
Okay. All right. Can you still hear me back there fairly easily? All right. I'll try to talk loud. Okay. So let's talk about why Rails. What is the big deal here? That's okay. I know the camera. Dr. Missouri, he wants the camera right here. So current demand for Rails is huge. I mean, there's a lot of people that are wanting it. Demand isn't as big as, say, like Java, but there's such limited supply that supply compared to demand is actually low. So a Rails programmer is in the top 5 most coveted Silicon Valley jobs according to CNN, Fortune, and average salary is $120,000 a year, just a Rails developer. So it's worth learning and learning well. Some sites that use Rails are these, plus many, many more. I'm sure you recognize some of these logos. Yellow Pages, Groupon, Hulu. Twitter uses it for their front end. They originally started purely on Rails, and then as they've gotten bigger, they've some parts of their infrastructure they've replaced, but their front end, from what I've read, still runs on Rails. Basecamp, Shopify, anyway, GitHub itself, right, is all on Rails. Now, Rails is the framework, but the programming language that undergirds Rails is called Ruby. Ruby is a relatively recent comer. I guess, all of this technology is recent when you think in terms of like Earth years and stuff. But Ruby came about in 1995, and by a programmer who is affectionately called Mats, because his last name is Matsumoto. And he actually is, he has a Mormon, I'm a Mormon video. He's LDS, which is kind of cool. Ruby is in a scripting language. So it's not a compiled language like Java or C, but every time it runs, it's interpreted. And there are packages that you can install with Ruby called gems. If you want to go to this website, rubytoolbox.org, ruby-toolbox.org, you can see a list of a bunch of gems. Or if you go to rubygems.org, I think is like the site where you can see all the gems. Gems are just packages that provide additional functionality. They're kind of like libraries that you can download and use in your Ruby projects. In fact, Rails is a gem. So it builds on top of Ruby. So let's talk about what Rails is. Rails is an open source framework for web application development that's written in Ruby. It came about in 2003 by this guy, David Heinemeier Hansson, who's just this rock star programmer. And he actually races cars. What do they call that? My mind is blanking. Yeah, like NASCAR racing. Yeah. But there's so many moving parts to a modern website, right? You've got the HTML, you've got the CSS, you've got the JavaScript, you've got the backend code, the database, templating engines, and Rails kind of pulls that all together and provides a package for you to use to build a modern web application and to do it rapidly and to do it conventionally. We'll talk about some of the things that Rails espouses as kind of its core values. The first one is this model view controller paradigm. And we'll dive more into that later. Second is it's meant to be very dry. So, which stands for don't repeat yourself. You want to code it once in one place and then use that in the rest of your application. So you don't want to be duplicating code all over. And then the third major core value is convention over configuration. Right? There's best practices that are out there that people have been using. Instead of having to go and configure every little thing, let's just pick what most people want to do and make it flexible so that you can modify it, but give kind of some smart, intelligent default values that will let you do what a modern web application needs to do. Okay? Any questions to this point? Okay. Let's dive into model view controller a little bit, because that's pretty important. And to illustrate that, let's see if this works. All right. I have a little video for you.
Hi, I'm Ruby on Rails.
And I'm PHP.
What's going on, PHP?
Oh, I just got a new contract to do maintenance on this application here. Just been going through trying to figure out where everything is. Can't really find anything. What about you?
Same thing, actually. Just got this application today and got a few things to do.
What was that?
Oh, I just fixed a bug.
But you just got that application.
Yeah, but all Ruby on Rails applications have the same organization, so everything really has its place.
Or someone would have done something like that when they were writing this application.
What is that, anyway?
I think it's SQL.
Ah,
Yeah, it's everywhere. It's in the HTML. It's just everywhere. Kind of itches.
All right, so Ruby on Rails, you don't need to write SQL. It takes care of it for you. We'll talk a little bit about that as we go along. But there's like 10 of those videos, so if you're ever bored one day, you can go do a Ruby on Rails versus PHP and watch some more funny videos. But let's talk about model view controller. How many of you have been introduced to model view controller and you feel like you're fairly fluent in what that means? Okay, great. So maybe half of you. Model view controller is a great way to separate concerns. So these different functions that your application needs to do, you're going to pull them and categorize them into three main areas. And we're going to walk through a web request and see how the model and the view and the controller interact. Okay, so we start out with our web browser, which we can call Chrome. And when a web browser sends a request to the web server with a Rails application, it talks to a controller. And it goes straight to a controller. And the controller is what takes that request and eventually what will give the browser back what it wants. So the controller is kind of the home base to talk with the browser. Now, what is the controller going to hand back to the browser? Well, it's going to hand back some HTML, right? Eventually, all it's going to hand back is HTML and maybe some CSS or JavaScript. All right, that's all it's going to hand back. It's not going to hand back any Ruby code. So what the controller does is it interacts with the view, which is where all of that presentation code is held. So that's where the HTML is. And there's a little bit of dynamism in the view that makes it a little bit dynamic, but mostly it's just presentation. Okay? But when you go to a website, you don't just want the same page every time. You want the page to change based on data. So maybe you log in, and in the top right, you want it to say, hello, Frank, if your name is Frank. You want the view to change a little bit. Well, that's where some of the dynamic part of the view comes in. But that data comes from somewhere. That data is stored in the model. So we have models which are in charge of data, we have views, which are in charge of presentation, and then we have controllers, which talk to both. Usually they'll talk to a model and get some data, and then take that data and hand it to a view, and then take what that view is with the data and pass it back to the browser. So the model, in this case, is a Ruby representation of data. Now, usually, we all know that data is not stored in Ruby. Data is usually stored in a database, right? So the model is in charge of talking to the database. Now, in Rails, the database can be any database really that's out there. So MySQL, Microsoft SQL Server, PostgreSQL, SQLite. So the database really doesn't matter because Rails will take care of that part for us. So we don't have to worry about the SQL. We just have to worry about making sure these models represent data, and then they'll talk to they're in charge of talking to the database, and Rails does that for us.
So for all you guys who are in the junior core, this means no DAOs, no database configurations, no database setup scripts. You just don't worry about it.
Right. Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry, that was it.
Oh, that's great. That is it, right? So the models never talk to the views, and the views never talk to the models, but they both go through the controller. Okay, so a typical web request comes in from Chrome, talks to the controller, and then the controller will decide which models to poll and which views to render, and then it will hand the result of that back to the browser. Okay? So any questions about models, views, and controllers? Okay, perfect. Well, what we're going to do now then is we're going to actually build something and see this in action, and it'll be good. Okay, so does everybody feel like they have Rails installed? Does anybody need any additional help getting their environment set up? Can you type in the command line and type Rails, and you see something? Here, let me show you. Okay. Let me make that bigger. So can everybody type in Rails-V like this and come back with Rails 4.0.0? Does anybody not get Rails 4.0.0? Different version? Okay. It's pretty easy to update the version, and Ryan can come around and help update the version. Rails 4.0 is a little bit different than 3. Do you have 3.2? Or what do you have there?
4.0.1.
Oh, okay.
We need to update.
All right. Well, then, that's great. Wish we all had 4.0.1. Okay. Perfect. Well, so in Rails, we do a lot of things on the command line like this. So it's good to get comfortable with it. There are some graphical tools to use, and we'll maybe use one of those later. If you're using the Nitrous link, so if you want to sign up for Nitrous, you can go to fishershawn.com and then click on this Nitrous link. If you're using Nitrous, you have the terminal at the bottom, file system on the left, and then the main editor in the middle, right? Oh, and by the way, this is what the Ruby toolbox looks like. So these are a bunch of gems that you can get for Ruby that will help you with various tasks. So if you want to do tagging in Rails, there's a bunch of gems that can help you. And we'll see how gems work a little bit later on. We'll use a gem to do some user authentication and stuff like that. Okay. Well, let's actually create a new Rails project. So I'm going to go to my directory that I want to put this Rails project in. And I'm going to create a new Rails project by typing Rails new, and then I'm just going to type AIS, which will be the name of the project. Okay? And what it's going to do is it's going to copy in the skeleton of the Rails application there for me, okay, into that folder. So it says your bundle is complete. Let me pull that up so you can see it. Your bundle is complete. Perfect. So now if I list out everything, I see AIS there. I can CD into AIS and look at what it did for me. So it created all these different files. Okay? Now it's nice to interact with Rails on the command line, but I like to use an editor to do it. And by the way, if you're in Nitrous and you hit Rails new something, it won't show up on the left unless you go up and hit the refresh button. Wait, how many of you are using Nitrous? Okay, so 4 of you. So if you go up and hit the refresh button, you should see the folder show up, and you can see all the files in there. Now I'm using an IDE called Aptana. Now Aptana you can download from here, aptana.com if you want. It's like Eclipse for web-based stuff. So if you're familiar with Eclipse, you'll like Aptana probably. And that's what I'll show tonight. So I actually have Aptana already up here. And here it is. And I'll go in and make this a little bit bigger. Okay, is that better? Probably you're all in the back. Afraid to sit up front. Okay, so I have some projects that I've already been working on over here. And what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to right click and say import, because I just created a new Rails project. So now I'm going to bring that into Aptana and import it. So I can choose existing folder as new project. How many of you are using Aptana? 1 of you? 2? Okay, you can use any text editor that you want, but I just like Aptana. I'm going to pick that this is a Rails project. I'm going to select this folder, which I have in here. Ugh. Okay, there's my new AIS folder. Right. I hit finish and I have AIS. Okay? So now I can see all these files. Right, this is what it created for us. Can everybody see those files? Is there anybody that can? Perfect. This is great. Okay. Now you can use any, like I said, any text editor to do these, but I'm just going to go over what each of these folders is, just kind of give you a brief overview. App is where most of your code will go. We'll spend most of our time in app. Bin, don't worry about. Config has some configuration. DB has database related stuff. Lib, don't worry about. Log has log files, so if you run across an error and you want to see the log file, it'll be in there. Public has files that will just be served up as is. You don't need to run them through Rails or anything. So here we have just like our 404 error page, our robots.txt, stuff like that. We don't worry about public too much. Rails is built to be very testable. So how many of you have heard of test-driven development? Okay, so usually what people will do nowadays in the workplace, hopefully is do test-driven development where they'll test for something that they haven't even built yet, and then they'll build it, and then they'll make sure their tests pass. It's called test-driven development. Rails is good for tests. We're not going to be going over any testing tonight, but here's where you'd do it. You'd write your test. Temp, don't worry about. Vendor, don't worry about. That's where like extra gems and stuff will store their files. Now, these files that you do need to worry about down here are the gem file. That's it, the gem file. The gem file tells your Rails application what gems it needs to run. So if you want to use a gem in your Rails application, you can. You just stick it in the gem file, and then anytime you try to run Rails, it'll notice if you have it installed or not. And if you don't have it installed, it'll throw up an error saying, oh, you can't run this until you install this gem. So that's actually nice. Let's take a look at what it looks like. So notice our Rails application needs the Rails gem. Surprise, surprise, right? We're using SQLite as the database. So it needs the SQLite gem. It's using Sass, which is a CSS preprocessor, and some other stuff down here as well. jQuery, if you've heard of jQuery, it includes jQuery. Anyway, if you we'll modify this file a little bit later, once we actually need a gem that we're going to use. Now, in order to go away, in order to use these gems, let me see if I can change this to be colors, background. Where do I? Pretty sure there's some fast way. Window. Okay, there we go. Let me try a new one. Okay. Yeah, that's better. So in order to, so you have this gem file. There's an automated way to take the gem file and install the gems. And in order to do that, you can, it's called bundle. So if you just type in bundle, then it will check and make sure that all the gems that you need are installed. And if not, it will install them, which is kind of nice. Okay. So that's the gem file. Let's take a look at the app directory. You'll notice some familiar words in here. We have models and views and controllers, right? Well, this is where we're actually going to build a model, a view, and a controller. Is right in here. But first of all, let's just see if this project works. Let's run it, and we'll see if we can see anything. In order to run it, Rails comes with a built-in web server that you can use. So if you go to your directory in the terminal, and if you type in Rails server, it will actually start up a little web server that runs, and it listens usually on port 3000. So if we come over here now and go to localhost port 3000, we should see this standard welcome aboard screen. Can anybody not see that screen? Is there anybody that can?
If you're running Nitrous, what do you do?
Oh, good. Oh, good point. Nitrous, you'll do the Rails S or Rails server. You can abbreviate it to S. And then there's a preview button. If you say preview, then you say port 3000. It should open up a new tab where you can see this. Is that right?
It's like 4,000,
Okay. So who can't see this?
How do you run Rails servers? Rails Python S or
Just Rails S or Rails server. Where'd it go? Rails server. Right there. Or you could just say Rails S. Okay, everybody got it? Laura, can you still not see it? Okay, great. Now, this has to sit here and run in the terminal, so I usually like to just leave that going, and then I'll open up a new one I'll open up a new terminal. And keep doing my programming in a different terminal, and I'll just leave this server running. Okay. On Nitrous, you can open up a new terminal, just as like a new tab at the bottom of the screen. Okay. So yay, right? We can see Rails. That's great, but we don't have any content in there yet. So what we're going to do now is we're going to walk through a model, a view, and a controller, and create one. Okay. So to create these things, Rails provides us with a nice, easy way to generate code, and that's invoked by saying Rails generate. Now, there's lots of things that you can generate. If you do generate, I think it's -H, it will actually tell you everything that you can generate. So we're actually going to use this one, model, and generate a model. So in order to do that, we're going to type in Rails generate. Is this big enough for you? Do you want me to make it bigger? Yes, a little bit. Rails generate model. We could also do generate controller, but we're going to do generate model, and then we're going to name it. So in this instance, we're going to be building. Right now, we're going to do a location model. So model represents something in the real world, we'll say. Right. So a person, a user, an employee. A model could relate to a database table. Right? So think of anything that you'd store in a database table. You might want a model for that. So in this case, we're going to call it location. Now with Rails, naming is very important. So remember how we talked about convention over configuration? Well, instead of naming things whatever we want and then configuring it so that it knows what we named it, if we just follow some simple rules when we name things, Rails will automatically be able to like hook up things that we've named without us telling it about it, because it's smart and it knows the rules. So usually, models will start with an uppercase letter and be singular. So location. Okay. There are some. I could push enter right now and it would generate a blank model. But there are some other things that we want to pass into this generate script. This generate script will take the name of the model, and it will also take attributes of the model. So, what are some things that a location should have? Maybe the title of the location, right? And we'll put string. So you tell it the data type as well. So you do the attribute and then colon and then the data type. So title string. And then, yeah, what else did somebody say? Maybe the address. So maybe we'll do address as another string. Oh, whoa, where are you going? Holy moly. All right. We've got an address, which is a string. Maybe we want like a city, too, which should probably be a string as well. Population. Integer. We'll call that a number, right? An integer. Other things that you can put in here are string, integer. You can put text for, it's like a string but huge. Usually most of the database column types you can put in here. So like, I think you can put in date time or date or decimal. If you put in decimal, you can put in like how many, like the precision and stuff. You can put it all in here, which is kind of nice. Okay, so let's actually hit enter and see what happens. All right, it tells us exactly what it did. It created this file, created that file, created that file, and created that file. These files are tests.
Actually, I have a question about
Yes.
that. How does it do inheritance in database? Like if this is creating your database table at the same time, how does it handle inheritance?
So, good question. The question was, how does it handle inheritance? And the response is, Rails can deal with a lot of different relationship types between tables. So those one-to-manys, manys-to-ones, many-to-many, all those sort of relationships can be handled with Rails, but also inheritance and polymorphic relationships can be handled as well. There's a good guide to how Rails does this. Rails guides are fantastic. The Ruby on Rails guides, guides.rubyonrails.org, are very well documented. And if you come up to the index, then under models, you can read about models, right? Models, and so Active Record is the library that provides support for models. So you'll see a lot of things like Active Record, Active Support, that sort of thing. Active Record is what provides model support. So Active Record associations is where you can look to see how you can do like polymorphic associations or even self-hierarchical associations in the same table. But Rails can pretty much handle any of that.
So in other words, you're never really looking at the database itself, would you?
You don't really look at the
No.
database. Mm-mm.
Yeah, so whatever your model does, your database will do that exact same functionality. So if your model inherits from another model, it'll make your database table inherit from another database table. And actually, if you open up that model that was just created using your generate model, you'll actually see that it inherits from Active Record base, which is kind of like your base database table or your base model table, model for the whole application. So
Perfect. Yeah. Great. Good question. Any other questions? Okay. Let's actually do that. Let's go take a look at what this created for us. All right. Notice in app models, it created a location model. It also created something called a migration. Yes.
Could you go over what we typed again to create that model? I
Yeah.
had it for mine, but nothing happened. I don't know if anyone else has used Nitrous had that model. It works? Okay.
It actually crashed the first time.
Press is the one I usually start.
And nothing like worked after.
Okay.
Huh. Interesting. Yeah, that's what we typed. All right, so let's go. Oh, I was going to explain migrations. So while you don't really have to touch the database, Rails does. And so Rails needs to know the database structure. Now, it will automatically infer the database structure from what we've put in, and we'll see that in a minute. But migrations are how you change the database. So a migration would be used to create a new table. A migration would be used to add a column to a table. A migration would be used to delete a table or drop a table. Any sort of change you want to do, change a column type, you do it through a migration. Yes?
So when we created this model and defined the data type, those could actually be other models. Is that correct?
So yeah. So for example, if we wanted to have a state model and a location would belong to a state, then in the location we would have, in the database we'd have a state ID column, right, as a foreign key. And in order to do that, Rails has a certain syntax. We would call it state. We wouldn't worry about state ID, but we'd call it state, and then we'd type in references.
Okay, so you actually define it differently.
What's that?
So you're saying it's defined differently instead of just as a basic data type?
Yeah. So we could put in like state ID and then put integer, but Rails knows about relationships. And so if we just put references, then it'll hook up all the state ID columns, the foreign keys, that kind of stuff for us. Good question, though. Okay, so that's what we typed. Let's go look at this migration so we see what a migration looks like. And by the way, if you just want to generate migration, if you just want to, like, say you wanted to add a column, then our Rails generate script will do that for us too. So Rails generate migration, and then we could say like add, maybe we wanted to add states to location table, right? And then it would create a migration for us. And we'd have to go fill in what to do. All right, so migrations have to deal with the database. So they're in the DB folder, and there's a migrate. And here's this file that was created for us, create locations. So if I go see that, I notice that here I'm creating a table called locations. And then here are my attributes with the data types that I put in. Now, something about Rails, it will automatically create an ID column that auto increments. So you don't have to worry about IDs. It will also put in t.timestamps. Now what that means is it will add in automatically a created at column and an updated at column that it will just take care of, right? That will always be up to date. So anytime you save a location, it will automatically update that updated on column. Anytime you create a new one, it will automatically update that created on column. Okay, and we can actually see that in a second. We'll go look at the database that this actually creates. Okay. So any questions about migrations? Can you see what the migration is doing? It's taking the database from the state that it is now, and when we run the migration, it will move it into this state. The cool thing about migrations is that they go both ways. So after I've created the table, I can roll it back and drop the table without changing this code. So Rails understands that there's two directions, right? You want to make the changes or you want to reverse the changes. Okay. Let's actually run this migration. See what happens. To run migrations, Rails provides a tool called Rake. Rake is a way to run tasks. And you give it the name of the predefined tasks to run. You can even make your own Rake tasks if you want. So if I was to type in Rake, well, let me just show you all the tasks that Rake can do by doing a -T. So you notice that there's a lot of tasks that Rake can do. And here's a little description of them. So we want to do a database task, so DB migrate the database. So that's the one that we want to do right there. Rake DB migrate. So let me type that in. Rake DB migrate. And we'll see what happens. All right. So we see that it's running the create locations migration. And it created the table. And it was done. Created the locations table and it's done. Let's actually go look at this database. Now, like I said, Rails by default uses SQLite, which is like a no configuration. It'll just work out of the box. It's file-based. So we can actually go and look in DB. And this file is the database right here. This development.sqlite3. That's the actual database. Now, if you double click on it, so I have a program that will open those. If you double click on it, it probably won't make much sense in your editor. But I have a program that will look at SQLite databases. It's called SQLite Database Browser that I've downloaded. And you can go find a SQLite database browser if you want. But this is just to show you. If I come in here and open in the DB file development.sqlite, I can open this database, and look, I can see the tables that are in here. One of which is locations with an ID, a title, address, city, population, created at, and updated at. And I can even go look at the data and look at this table, and there's nothing in there, right? As is expected. We haven't put anything in there. But the structure's there. If you want to, just as a side note, if you want to make Rails talk to MySQL, like a MySQL server, or a PostgreSQL server, all you have to do is come into the config and go to database.yml, YAML they call it. And right here, you put in your database configuration. So you'll notice we're using SQLite 3. This is the location of our database, which we just saw, we just opened up. It's got some other figures. And you can easily Google different settings to put in here to connect to different databases. Yes, Ephraim.
So is this essentially a database abstraction?
Right. Uh-huh. Yep, it's an ORM. So you don't deal with the database except in some more advanced instances, and Rails just kind of takes care of it. Let's look at an example. I want to introduce you to another tool, okay, that that will actually load up our Rails environment and let us like run code real time within it. And that's called the Rails console. So that's back in our terminal. If I type in Rails console, and it loads up my development environment, and all of a sudden I have access to all my models, and usually this is what you use to test your models and to do model development, because it's really easy to interact code to code with your models. So, for example, if I type in location, let's see what happens. It knows about our locations. It knows that a location needs an ID, a title, address, etc., etc. Let's actually make a new location. So I'm going to make a new location, location.new. Okay. And look, it returns to me an object that has all of these location fields, but they're all nil. They're all empty. Nil is like null in Ruby. Okay, but that doesn't do me much good. I want to actually populate those, so I'm going to store it to a variable, L equals location.new. All right, so now it returns it to me, but now I have a handle for it. Now I can grab it. I can just type in L, and I have that object. Yes, Ephraim.
Case sensitive?
Let's find out. Nope. Or yes, it is. It's case sensitive. The nope was for this doesn't work. So L works, but capital L doesn't, right? Okay, so now we can actually do things like L.title equals BYU, right? And now if I type in L, right, title is BYU. So I can go ahead and fill in all this. Address equals, 1000 Cougar Way, whatever the address really is. L.city equals Provo. All right, L.population equals 30,000. And notice how I haven't filled in ID, created at, or updated at. But if I do L.save, watch what happens. Okay. Let's see what happened here. Transaction. If you know about database transactions, Rails wraps everything in a transaction so you can roll it back easily. But look what it did. This is the SQL. It generated SQL for us, and it executed it. Right, so insert into locations, these values. It's automatically SQL injection proof. And it returned true because it's saved. That's what this is, return true. So now if I type in L, I notice that it has an ID, it has a created at, and it has an updated at. So this is a great way to test and interact with your models. It's right on the console. Oh, and also that saved it. Let's go look at the database again. So if I come up here, where's the refresh? Okay, there's manual refresh, right? Well, notice that it's in the database. It inserted it in, right? Created at, updated at, filled in. There it is. Okay? So that's a simple model. Any questions about models? Okay. Why don't we take 5 minutes, and I want you to each create another model. Okay? You can pick a model. You can pick any model that you want. So, like, does anybody have an idea for a model? What would be a real-world object that you could model with attributes? What would a good table name be? Anybody have any ideas? Morgan?
Employee.
Employee. That'd be a great one. Company, right? Yeah, stuff like that. Yeah, Ryan.
I was going to say for this app we're doing, event name or event.
Event? Yeah, okay. Event. An event. So let's take just 5 minutes, and I'll kind of walk around. Ryan will be around, and just see if you can create your own model.
So you're running your server here. So you want
5, 4, 3.
All right. So now you've all got a chance to make the model. I failed to mention that before you do that, you should probably exit out of the console, right? This is a lot of you figured out. So that's a model. Okay, now we're going to go in and we're going to look at a controller and then a view, and then we're going to use a gem to magically create a login system for us, okay, which is really cool. So let's look at a controller. Right now, we have a default controller in controllers. Oh, by the way, we didn't even go look at what a model looks like. Under model, you notice that that's all a model is it's a location object that inherits. That's what this means in Ruby. It inherits from, or it extends, active record base, which, like I said, remember how active record connects with models, provides the model functionality. Anyway, so that's what a model looks like. You can give models functionality, additional functionality, like say we wanted to have a location say hi to you. Def is like a new class method. You could say def say hi, and then take a name, for instance. And then all we'd have to do is so we'll see if this works. We're departing off the beaten path here. Okay. So then all of a sudden, if I were to come, not there. If I save that, come over here and load up the Rails console again. Oh, by the way, there's some cool finder methods. So like if I want to find the first location, I could just say find one. Or I could say location.first or location.last. And it will automatically find those. So I'm going to say location.first. And look, it found my location that I already created. And I'm going to try to say hi to Sean. And it says, hi, Sean. All All right, so you can give models functionality. All right, you probably wouldn't print to the console in a web app, but that's just an example. Comments in Ruby are these number signs, so we can just comment all that out, and that's fine. Okay, so let's look at a controller. Now, a controller accepts requests from the web browser and returns things. So if I come back to our terminal, I can actually generate a new controller, and we're just going to call this the home controller. So when we go to our website, we want to show a home page. So we're going to have a controller to accept that home request and just return a home page view. Okay? So we'll call it a home controller, and we will give it an index method. Okay, and we'll see what that does in just a second. Oh. Controller home index. Okay, maybe we won't give it to it right now. Oh, I did the same thing we all just did. I forgot to exit the console. Rails generate controller home index. This should work. Okay, now notice that it created a lot more files than before. It created some testing, which we're not going to worry about. It created a helper, some more testing. It created a JavaScript file for us and a CSS file for us. That's nice. Created some views for that index action, and it actually created the controller right here. So if we go look at what it created, notice I now have a home controller. Let me close out some of this stuff. And it gave me an index method. All right, an index function. Okay, that's really all we need in this controller, because all it's really going to do is serve up just a home page. But that's what a controller looks like. Application controller. Remember how we talked about how controllers can like talk to models and then hand that data to the views? Let's go ahead and do that here. Let's find our first location and pass that to the view and display that on our home page. Here's your first location. So in order to do that, any variable that starts with an @ sign in the controller will automatically get passed to the view, which is nice. So I'm going to say location equals location.first. So that will find the first location and store it in this @location variable, which will automatically be available in the view. Okay? That's really the function of a controller in Rails, is to talk to models and pass data to views. Okay? So let's go look at some views. Notice in views, we now have two folders. Layouts, which has an application layout, and then the home, which has index. Notice how this index name matches to this index name. Okay, that's important. Rails does convention over configuration, meaning that these names are important. So what I name the controller method will be what I name the view file. Because this will automatically know to look under the home folder, because it's the home controller, and it will look for the index file because it's the index method. Okay? Let's go look at that. It's got some default stuff here. Now, you notice that there's no HTML at the top, there's no HTML at the bottom. How many of you have built HTML pages before? Okay, mostly everybody. So you notice that that isn't there. And the reason is because it's over here in application layout. So here's where you have your doc type, your head, your title, blah, blah, blah. And then you have this funky directive that says yield. what it's doing is it's templating. So it's giving you a standard template, which is in application, where you can put in your header and footer that will appear on every page. And then where it says yield is where the content will change based on what page you're on. And you can make multiple layouts. And of course, you can have multiple content that goes in the yield. Right, so this content will get stuck right into here. Okay, one more piece of the puzzle. When you go to a Rails application, you need to know where, or the Rails application needs to know which URL maps to which controller. So how does it know that when I go to myrailsapplication.com/home, how does it know that I want to go to the home controller? Well, that mapping is in a file called config, the config folder, routes. So if we go take a look in there, it has a lot of good comments, but you notice that it says get home/index. That means it's going to respond to the URL home/index. And because this is a standard way of doing things, it will map to the home controller and the index method. So let's go try it out. I assume that you still have your servers running on maybe a different tab. Let's restart the server. So if you hit Command-C, it will exit. And then you can type in Rails server again. And then let's go to it. So let's come over here. Localhost 3000, we hit enter, and it's the same thing, right? We haven't changed the URL for just the default URL, but we have created a URL that says home index, right? If we type home index, we see what was in the view. So if I look at the source, you notice that it took the application layout, which is all this code, and then where it says yield, it pasted in that code from the index view, and then it finished out the layout, right? So let's go change this to say something more interesting instead of just that. Let's go back to our index view, our home index, and instead of this, let's say, hello, you should visit this location, right? And now let's print out that location. In order to do that, we do these funky tags, which means this is where we're going to put dynamic Ruby code into our view. Okay? So I can run any Ruby code in here that I want. I could do an if statement, if, I'm cool equals 1, then print out, I'm cool. And then down here we end it. Otherwise, well, we could even do like an else I'm not cool. All right, let's go see what it says. Refresh the page. It says I'm cool. Oh, equals 1. Oops. Okay, well, obviously I'm cool does not equal 1 because I'm cool doesn't exist. That's why it's giving me an error. Oops. Let's try that. Okay. So it still doesn't exist, but it thinks that it might. And so obviously I'm not cool, right? Because that variable doesn't equal 1. But let's actually now print out this location. So if I type in, what did we call the location? Location, right? If I type this in, it won't work because what it's doing is it's just executing this line of code. I need to say something, print out this variable. And to do that, this is a shortcut where you put in an equal sign right after the %. And that means whatever comes next, print it out. So here I'm just going to print out location. All right. And if I hit refresh, we're going to see the location object. All right, so this is its memory address. This is the location object. Obviously, we don't want to show that. We really want to show the location's title, right? So now if I come back and hit refresh, then there we have it. Okay, so you see the moving pieces. You have the controllers that take the requests, that get the data, pass the data to the view, and then the view can do whatever it wants to display the data, right? Any questions about that? Okay. Can you think how you would use this to build a website? Okay. Good, because that's what we're doing, right? Now, Rails has a lot of moving parts as well. I mean, obviously we're going, I don't know, fairly quickly through these concepts. We're not doing a ton. There's a lot of moving parts, the routes file, the everything. But hopefully by the time we're done with this, you'll have enough of the basic building blocks to be able to go and experiment more, to know what to search for in Google, and to begin building a really awesome website. And I'm about to show you how you can use different building blocks to speed up that process. Right? So normally with web applications, you'll want some sort of login process, correct? That's so common for people to want to log in and sign up and register. Well, because it's so common, people have written libraries and gems that will do this for you. So what I've done is I went to the Ruby toolbox and I was looking for authentication. So I just do a search and I find authentication, Rails authentication. It's kind of Rails authentication. Okay, so if I click on that, I can see all these. Nope. I can see all these different gems that do Rails authentication, and it ranks it according to popularity. All right, so here we have Devise, the Devise gem, which I've used before, which we actually used last year in our Ruby on Rails presentation. You can see that the latest version was released 2 days ago. That it's had, 5 million, 5.8, almost 6 million downloads. So it's pretty popular. There's OmniAuth, which is another one, AuthLogic, RESTful, Sorcery, which I've used before, which is also pretty cool. Development is active, which is nice. Okay, but I found this one, Clearance, which I liked. So I went to these, right? I clicked on them and went to their websites and looked at them. You can see, you can go to its website right here, which is just its GitHub page. And down here, we have how to install and configure and use it. And the reason I chose Clearance is because it's really, really simple and provides Rails authentication really quickly, really fast. So let's actually implement this gem into our Rails application, and then we can, it will do it for us, which is really nice. So do you remember what file do we need to change to add a gem to our project? The gem file, yeah. So that's down here, at the bottom. Gem file. Okay, so let's just add it in. Gem. It was called Clearance with an A. Gem Clearance. All right. So boom, it's in our gem file. Do you remember what command we have to run to install the gems that are in our gem file? Bundle, yeah. Good memory. So let's do that. Let's run bundle. See what happens. Now I've already installed it, so it went really quick. For you, it might have to download and compile it. Okay, so now it's installed. Well, that was easy, right? We installed it, but we actually have to. So now we have the gem, the executable. Now let's use that executable to generate our little login system. So if I go back to its instructions, it says, include the gem in your gem file, check. Run bundle, check. Make sure the development database exists, then run the generator. Rails generate clearance install. Okay, so let's run it. We go Rails generate clearance install. Oops. Okay, let's see what it does. Ooh, it did a lot of stuff. Right? So it says it created these files. Look, it gave us a user model. That's cool. It gave us a database migration to create the user table in the database. And then it gave us some next steps. Mailer, we won't worry about mail. Really, it's just an email. Display user session and flashes. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy this. And we're not going to worry about wondering about too much about what this does right now. Come on. Okay, but we're going to copy this and paste it into our application layout file before the yield. Okay, so I'm going to paste that in right there. No problem. Save. Does anybody want me to go back and show that again? Okay. And then look, it says migrate, rake db migrate. So let's rake db migrate. And that's going to create that users table. Add a couple indexes, that sort of thing. Any questions up to this point? Okay, so we have just unlocked the power of that gem in our application. And it was that easy. So let's actually go see the magic happen.
Where did you paste that data again?
So I pasted it in Views, Layouts, Application, right beneath the body tag. And what this code is doing is it's saying if the user's going to be signed in, display them a sign out link. If the user's not signed in, display a sign in link. If there are errors, like for example, they put their password in wrong and we need to display that they're going to put their, please retry, then that's what this will do for us. Okay, so you can see how the view is like a mix of Ruby, Rails code, and HTML. Okay, so does everybody have that in? Did everybody do rake db migrate? Yeah.
What's your command? Rails install or Rails generate clearance?
Yeah, Rails generate clearance install. So it looks like that. And make sure you're not in the console either. Okay. So let's come back to our website here. Okay. Uninitialized constant, application controller clearance. Let's come to our root. And then let's go sign up. I wonder if is in your gem file. Run a bundle update, try that. Then run a bundle install again. So, and then try the install script. Were you able to get it to work? Okay. Perfect. So look at what it did. All of a sudden we have a sign up page. We have a sign in page. We have we have messages, right? If we do something bad, we have validation from HTML5 form elements. Right, we can register, we can sign up. So all of that we just got for free with this gem. So if I sign up and I say me@me.com, password me, then it registered me and it took me to the home page. But now if I go sign in, you notice that, oh, I'm already signed in. I can sign out. I can sign out. I can sign in with me@me.com, password me, logged in, and it took me to the home page. And if we go and look at what's in the database, so if I, users. So if I go look in the users table, you notice that I've got my email address. It encrypts my password, so it's very secure. This gem will even email you and say, hey, confirm your account. It will do the remember me. So all that functionality comes with you, or comes with it. Okay, so that's kind of cool. And if you want to, so those are ugly views. If you want to customize those, that's pretty easy too. You notice that they're actually not here. They're not in views. It just dynamically generates those. But if we want to customize them, what we can do is copy them into our project, and then we can just edit them. Right, so in order to do that, it's down here a little bit on the instructions page. Overriding views. Right? There's a shortcut to copy all clearance views into your app. Rails generate clearance views. So let's try that. And we'll see what it does. Oh, we have a conflict. It's trying to copy. And since we already have an application layout, it doesn't want to override it without asking. But we can pretty much override it because we haven't done anything to it. So I'm going to type in Y. And you notice that it creates all those views, and we can go look at them. Yeah?
Your server's still running, and you closed your terminal window. How do you stop your server?
If you try Rails console, or if you try Rails server again, does it not work?
It says it's already running.
Go into, is it on Mac or Windows? Windows? Go into Task Manager and kill that process.
Nitrous.
Oh, in Nitrous.
Yeah. It says to do Control C to shut down server, which I just do, and it does its own line, and then I just do Rails server again to try to restart the server after shutting it down.
Well, if worst comes to worst with Nitrous, you can always go up to boxes in the top corner and click on shut down or restart on your whole box, and it will restart your machine. And that'll definitely clear it out. Otherwise, you'd have to do, I mean, you have terminal. You can do anything you want. So you could list processes. You can kill all those processes from the terminal. But if you want to just restart your box, you can do that too. Okay, so look, it generated all these views for us. Let's go look at them. We have passwords. We have sessions. We have users. Sessions has to do with logging in and out. Users has to do with registering. And passwords has to do with like, oh, I forgot my password. Send me a password reset link. That's what passwords is for. Okay, so you notice that our application has pretty much the exact same thing that we just copied and pasted in. Users, we have new user, form, right? That's here. Now, what's cool is that there are so many different libraries and gems that you can use that probably what you've done before fits into a gem. So I would always look and see what's available first, because some of these are dead easy, right? Like that was super easy. We didn't have to build the HTML, anything. Of course, now we can change it. Now instead of signing up, we can say maybe log in, and go over and see in our sign up page. Oh, we're already logged in. Let me log out. Actually, yes, sign out. So
Does this sign-in one actually send emails to our email, or?
So it won't, because we didn't configure a mail agent. We didn't configure sending email. But that's fairly easy to configure as well. If you go to config, you may have to generate a configuration file in here, but all it is a configuration file, and it can send mail. So it may be an application. This is where all the config is. Maybe not. Okay. So that was a new. Oh, not login, like create an account. Was that the page that we did? Yeah. So anyway, you can change the views. You can do whatever. Okay. Do you have any questions up to this point? Okay. Pretty simple. Can everybody create an account and log in and stuff? Let's actually make this easier. By putting our, so you know how we still have that like welcome aboard? Let's go make that so it points to our home page, right? Which was home index, right? And look, we have our sign in link there. The way that we do that is with our routes. So routes.rb. Here you see you can have the root of your site routed with root. So let's just uncomment that. Welcome index. We called ours home index. All right, so that's our controller and then our method. But now, I bet it won't work because we'll probably have to restart the server. Oh, it worked. It worked. Right? So anyway, so now we can sign in, sign up. It won't email us anything right now. We just have to go configure that, which isn't that hard. Okay. I want to show you two more things. One is Bootstrap. Has anybody used Bootstrap? Like Twitter Bootstrap? Okay, so this will be good. And then the second is scaffolding. Scaffolding is really nice. Scaffolding takes, so the CRUD functions, create, read, update, and delete. It will automatically generate views and controllers for a certain model, which is nice. Okay, it's a good starting point when you're creating a model. You can create this scaffold so you can create and update and view these models. Let's go see what it looks like. Okay, and then we'll wire in Bootstrap so everything looks a little bit nicer. Okay, and then we'll have some time for questions, and we'll leave with some ideas for improvement so you can take this site and do one additional thing, add one additional feature or one something that you want to expand on or go learn about so that you can just increase your knowledge on your own by just a little bit for Rails, right? And maybe feel comfortable with doing that. So let's do a scaffold. So it's another generate command. Rails generate scaffold. All right, and then the arguments are just like the model's arguments. So really, this scaffold is to create and support a model. So let's do an activity model. Or I guess we might as well do let's do an activity model. Activity model. Okay, so first we'll have the title of the activity, which is a string. We'll have the date of the activity, or like when the activity should start, right? So we'll call it start date, and it will be a date time. We could even have an end date. That would be a date time. We can have it be owned by a user. So just like we were talking about earlier, I can use this special type references, and that will mean that this activity will reference the user that owns it. So it will create a user ID column and everything. Okay, maybe a description of the activity, and that could be long. So let's make that a text. Okay. So that's a good start, right? Let's hit enter and see what happens. Now this will probably generate the most files out of all the generators that we've done, because it generates a model, a controller, and a series of views and tests, and it links everything up in that routes file so that the URLs match up. So this is kind of just like a boilerplate code that we can go into. Notice that it generated a migration, so we'll have to run rake db:/migrate, right? Generated the activity model, some tests. This is the routing portion. It created an activities controller, created some views, some tests, some helpers, some JavaScript, some CSS right there. So we need to run rake db:/migrate to actually create that table, create the activities table, and then we go and watch the magic. Hopefully we don't have to restart our server, but if I type in activities here, okay, this is what it made for us. And you can go and see all the code that it generated. So it's listing activities. Here's everything that we have. We can create a new activity. Notice how it automatically created like date time drop downs, and description, because it's a text, is like a text field instead of just a text box. Right? So if I say hike the Y on November 17th, November 16th at 1:48, and then we'll end at 1:54. It'll be a really quick hike. And then user, we'll see if that works. Sometimes the scaffolds don't do very well with that references thing. We'll see if that works. Description, we'll go hike the Y. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. So here, activity was successfully created, which is on there twice. That's weird. We can go figure that out, but we go back, then all of a sudden here we have all of our info, right? So that's kind of cool. We can go edit it. So that's what scaffolding is, right? So a little bit of styling and some tweaks, and this can be the basis for a fun website. So let's hurry and go put in some Bootstrap so we can make it look pretty, and then we'll kind of finish up. Any questions about scaffolding? So if you want to see what it did, right, all of a sudden we have activities views in here, lots of them. So here's the index with this table, right? We have an activities controller that has these different methods: index, show, new, edit, that kind of stuff. And of course we have the activity model, which belongs to a user. Remember how we said user references? Let's put that in, which means that now each activity knows about the user that owns it and can access that user. And relationships are really powerful in Rails, and they're really neat. Okay, so there is actually a Bootstrap gem that is really easy. Gem, Bootstrap, and then we're using Sass for style sheets, right? So we're going to do Bootstrap Sass. And then we're going to put in the approximate version that we want. And we want squiggly or tilde caret, which means approximately 3.0.2.0. Approximately, right? What the squiggly means is that this last one, it'll take any version of this last character. Okay, so now what do we have to do to install the gem? Bundle. Right. Hey, did you get clearance working?
No.
Ah, okay. See if this works. So here's the command, Bootstrap Sass, that. All right. And then we bundled. And then we just need to make a few changes. So let's go look at where all the CSS is and the JavaScript is for our application. It's in Assets. So this is where you can plunk your images, your JavaScripts, your style sheets. Notice that we have some that it's been building for us. Okay, scaffolds is the one that comes with that scaffold generator. And we've already seen that that's ugly. Let's delete it. Okay, Bootstrap won't really work if scaffolds is there. And then notice that we have application.css. Notice how it's different, CSS versus css.scss. Let's rename that to be the same. .scss. Okay. Now what we're going to do is in our application .css, because we've installed that gem, all we have to do now is import. Sorry, I can't move that higher here. Here we go. We're going to import Bootstrap. Okay, and that should load up the Bootstrap CSS. We want to load up the Bootstrap JavaScript as well, so let's go into JavaScripts and go into our application.js. And notice how it's requiring jQuery and TurboLinks and all this stuff. Let's just require Bootstrap as well. Bootstrap. Okay. And let's see what happens. Let's see if it works. We're probably going to have to restart the server, so let's just do that right now. So
Bundle install, just bundle.
bundle is an alias for bundle install, yeah. So we restart the server, right? We come to our page, and let's see if the font changes. Nope, didn't change. By the way, you notice how Rails just puts together the HTML, right? So notice that we have all of this Bootstrap JavaScript in here, which is kind of cool. And but I don't see any CSS. right? We want application.css. That's what we want in here. So let's go figure that out. Let's try putting the body background color to red and see if it picks it up. Oops. Okay, see, so it's not even getting our application.css. Let's go to our view and make sure that it's importing it. Views. Yeah. View. So it's just doing the JavaScript include tag, and it's not actually doing the CSS, which we want. So let's add that in, which I think is style sheet include tag application. Let's see if that works. No, it's not style sheet include tag. We can go look at one of these other ones that I have to see it. Style sheet. I think it's just style sheet link tag. I'll just go check it out. Because we had it in our old layout. Yep, style sheet. Yep, style sheet link tag. That's what it was. Oh. There we go. So there we go. There we go. See how the font changed? See that? So Bootstrap is now installed. So that was super easy to install Bootstrap. And what's cool about Bootstrap is you can customize everything. So if you come into here, into your style sheet, say you wanted to change like the link color, you can just like change the link color to something else.
Just putting a template in for using, like a theme, Bootstrap theme.
Yeah, yeah, it's really easy. Let's see if that works. No, I probably got the variable name wrong. But you can look up Bootstrap variable names, and all you do is change it right there. Okay, so now let's make this table just look, table look really good real quick. The table was in that, so we know that it's in the activities views because it's in the activities controllers. So here's our views activities, and index, right, is the default. Oh, oops, sorry. Index is just the default, which here we see our table. We can add in some Bootstrap styling. So if we just do something as simple as that, then notice how it changed the table and it makes it look better. Anyway, you can use Bootstrap, which is at getbootstrap.com. You can look at all the stuff. So tables, right? Just give it a class of table. If you want striped rows, we'll use table striped. So we could use table striped and see if that works. So it did work. You can't really see it, but it's just a light shading there. If we add a new one, we'll I don't know if you can see it from back there, but it's a little bit different color. Anyway, so Bootstrap is super easy. Provides a lot of stuff to make it look better. Okay, so we're going to kind of wrap up. We're almost out of time. There's a lot more that we could do. So how I envision this site right now is a user can log on and they can create an activity that they want to do. And then anybody else can come in and see that same activity that they want to do. And they can say, I want to do that activity too. And they click on a link or something that says, I want to do it too. And then it records that. And so anytime I go to show an activity, instead of just saying the user that owns it, maybe it'll show a list of these users want to do that. And then maybe an email link where you can say, email all these users and let's set up a time to actually go do this activity, right? So that is not very many steps away from where we're at right now with just this scaffold code. And we don't have time to go into it. But, so I want each of you to think of some maybe small improvement that you could make on our site here. Maybe on the home page, you want a link to activities, right, which we don't have. Maybe you want to hook up this user so the user works. Maybe you want to style it with Bootstrap completely differently. Or maybe you want to add a certain piece of functionality. So everybody take just a couple seconds and think of something that you want to, or that you think would be cool to change about this to just make it just a little better. Okay, and then I want to hear some ideas. Yeah, Ryan.
I think we'll be able to post pictures at the end of the activity.
Okay, post pictures. Yeah, that's a great idea. Post pictures of the activity. Yeah.
Maybe you can have a map like that shows where the location is.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
If they're familiar, they can find it.
That's a great idea. That's a cool idea. What else? Any other ideas? Okay. Well, I hope that you've enjoyed kind of this whirlwind approach to learning Ruby on Rails, and that you feel as if you can now dive in and make a controller, make a model, make a view, and hook them up a little bit. That you know how to use routing, at least where it is, right, to go look at it and see where the routing is to hook up the routes, the URLs to the controllers. I hope that you've seen the power of scaffolding and how fast that lets you create a workable, for example, an activity list. I hope you've seen how powerful it is to use gems to accomplish things like signing in. That's another idea for improvement here, is that maybe you can make this page only available to logged in users. That would be really easy. In fact, if you wanted to do that, all you have to do is look at this clearance gem, and it tells you up here, use authorized to control access in controllers. That right there would make sure that activity list you could only do when you're logged in. So anyway, thanks for coming, and I'll be here for a little while if you have any additional questions, and feel free to always to contact me. I'll try to put my contact info somewhere. I'll send it to Morgan, and we can get that sent out. Okay, thanks.